Greetings, friends. Time for one last plaidcast of this fall 2014 semester. I mean, you never know. Maybe I'll do a Christmas shout out. But this semester is closing up, and I still had so many hundreds of requests for podcasts. I feel sorry that I'm in a plaid slacker all semester and not done more. But a bunch of you shouted out here recently that you wanted to see a podcast on the dropping price of oil. Peeps were saying, Boyer dude, what's up? Professor dude, what's up with the price of oil going down? That's like never happened in our lifetimes. I thought about it like, it probably hasn't. 20 years ago when I was teaching classes, I was saying, oh, the price of oil will go up for the rest of your lives. And that's pretty much been true up until very, very recently, this particular year. The price of oil for most of the last decade has been about 100 or 110 bucks a barrel, and it spikes even higher when there's world crises. But now it's floating down around 80 bucks a barrel. It could go lower. So what's up with this price of declining price of oil? And more importantly, what are the geopolitical repercussions? That's the stuff that's actually much more fascinating to me and that I can talk about, because I ain't no economist, but I can tell you how the dropping price of oil affects the real world and real politics in real time, and it already has started to do this. By the way, this plaidcast is specifically getting done, and a shout out goes to the students that requested it. Suni Murthy, Jordan Schwartz, and Joshua Chung specifically asked for this, or as I like to call them, S. Mert, J. Schwartz, and J. Chung. This one's for you all and the rest of the class and the world as well. So what are the geopolitical repercussions of this declining oil price? First time for maybe ever in the lifetimes of you freshman students. Well, first off, how does the price of a commodity get lowered or subsequently get raised? It's the old supply and demand shtick. And I'm no economist, so I don't know that I can explain this perfectly well, but it's a pretty simple principle. Depending on what the commodity is, between the supply, how much of that you have, and the demand, how much people want, a balance is met, and that balance is what the going price on the market is. Namely, or specifically we should say, if you have very high demand, a whole bunch of people want something, and you have only a certain supply of it, the price goes up because more people want it than stuff that can be had. And so more people compete and say, well, I'll outbid this person to buy that stuff, and therefore the price goes up. So when demand is high and supply is low, price goes through the roof. And of course, the converse, or the inverse of that is, if there's a whole bunch of supply, if everybody's producing a lot of wheat or a lot of corn or a lot of oil, but not as many people need it, well, then there's a glut on the market, and us suppliers, that we start competing with each other. And so we say, oh, well, I'll sell my wheat for a buck a bushel, or somebody might sell for 75 cents a bushel because they need the money. So we're competing on the supply side, and prices go down. Make sense? So high supply usually means prices go down. Low supply usually means prices go up. But the demand has to be there too. If nobody wants it, whatever it is you're making, if nobody on planet Earth wants it, doesn't matter if you have a high amount or a low amount. No, if there's no demand, there's no high price, there's no price at all. Does that make sense? Prices are based on how much of the stuff that exists and how much people want it. Now, let's get specific to oil. Why are the prices going down? Because of both sides of the supply-demand equation. Demand has actually been going down. So the demand has been less. Less people have been wanting oil. What? How is that possible? Is there a global climate summit that's finally met and we've all concluded we shouldn't use fossil fuels, and so we're all going to start hugging trees and living in yurts? No, it's not even anywhere close to that. Demand, worldwide demand for oil and the fossil fuels in general has gone down because we've been in a global recession for 3 or 4 or 5 years now, depending on where you're at. And during a recession, there's lower economic growth. Lower economic growth means fewer factories producing less stuff. So just from the demand of, well, there hasn't been as much stuff being made in the world, and so there hasn't been as much need for the fossil fuels to fuel the production of that stuff. So global recession has affected demand, but also, on a positive note as well, better technologies means better fuel usage. So anytime you hear about a government or country or a president or prime minister saying, hey, we're going to reduce emissions on vehicles, or we're going to get better gas mileage on cars. And that means if you get better gas mileage, then it's less of the oil and gas that's needed for those cars, and you multiply that times millions and millions of cars in a country, and so you have less demand because of better technologies. And also we have better technologies, even in factories and stuff, to burn fuel. So hopefully, we hope that they're burning it cleaner with less pollution, but for sure technologies have been increasing to get more bang for your buck when you're using fossil fuels. More energy is extracted better in a variety of ways. So global recession combined with better technologies means we're using, at least for the last few years, we've been using less oil than we typically would be. And we're taught, when I say we, I mean we, the human race, right? The entire globe, not just America, not just Russia, not just Africa. All of us have been using less oil. Demand has been going down. At the same time, and it's a double whammy, see? Both sides of this equation are getting whammy. So demand has been going down, but supply has actually been going up. How has supply of oil been increasing? What, have we been discovering a whole lot more of it? Yes. In a word, everybody's been finding oil everywhere. And if you followed world regions at all for the last decade, you've probably heard me reference that Russia probably has the biggest reserves of oil on planet Earth now. All of the Gulf states, all of the Middle Eastern states that we typically associate with oil production, they have tons, but what's been happening over the course of the last 5 to 10 years is more people outside of the Middle East have been finding more oil. And I'll just point to a couple of bizarre ones I remember reporting on in class throughout the last several years because they struck my fancy. Tickled my fancy. I'm like, what? They found oil there? First off, they think that there's tons of oil in the Arctic Sea, which, because of global warming, it used to be covered with ice. Now it's going to be not so covered with ice, so people can get in there and explore for oil. And that hasn't been proven yet, but they think there's a bunch of oil up there. The South China Sea. The Chinese and other countries are starting to explore for oil there. All off the Chinese coast, they're looking for oil and starting to pop in different places, but not huge amounts. Off the coast of Brazil, and Brazil is a specialist in deep water mining. A lot of Brazilian companies are really good at it, and they think, this is just reported in the last year or two, they think that in deep water drills off the Brazilian coast may be more oil than in all of Saudi Arabia. And you're like, what? Okay, that's huge. So, and even to Australia, off the north west coast of Australia, they think they might have struck a bunch of oil in some, not deep water, but just offshore drilling there. So you start to put some of these things together, and it's like, whoa, there's a lot more oil being discovered. And then let me add the technology thing in there too. There's been a whole lot of great technological advances in the extraction of oil and the processing of oil and the processing of oil shales. And there's all sorts of oil in places that we couldn't used to get to because the technology wasn't there and it was too cost prohibitive. So you may have a lot of oil in a place, but if it's too dirty or too deep or it's too hard to get to, you can do it, but it would cost too much money, so you wouldn't bother. Well, technologies have gotten to the point of, actually, you can get to this stuff. Technologies are better. You can get to it cheaper. You can process it cheaper. You can clean it up better. So you have a combination of new stuff being found all over the planet and new technologies which are allowing more stuff to be extracted better. And let me finish, though, on the big one, fracking. So this is a combination of finding new oil and increases in technology. And this is an entirely United States-driven thing. The United States, we're the fracking kings. It sounds like something dirty. We're going to frack the frack out of the United States because we're the masters of fracking. And fracking is, look how technical I'll get right now. Fracking is when you basically stick a straw into the ground and inject in some sort of chemical combination and steam to blast oil up, to pressurize rock, to push oil out of it that you ordinarily could not do even 10 years ago. This technology is totally an American phenomenon, and it's been going gangbusters in America. Basically, they've found or discovered or been able to extract a whole crap ton of oil in America that was too costly to even mess with 5 or 10 years ago. If you want to look more deeply into this, just go look up North Dakota. I mean, they're fracking all over the place. They're fracking the frack out of the whole frack in the United States. This is happening in Pennsylvania and Texas, but North Dakota is the case study you want to go look up because North Dakota wasn't making no oil 10 years ago, and now it's a boom town. It's like the Wild West. There are whole cities being created in North Dakota, and miners coming in to work. They're having to construct hotels overnight to house workers. It's a huge boom for the entire North Dakota economy, and it's all based on this technology. Okay. One more thing I might add to the supply. So fracking is huge in the United States. Finding oil in other places. Technologies allowing oil to be extracted from other places. But also the major oil exporting countries, like say the OPEC countries, those Middle Eastern countries that we think of as typically having all the oil, they're still producing oil like gangbusters because most of those states rely on it for income. Like the majority of their economy. Like 60 or 70 or 80% of all the money the government makes every year is from oil. And I would just pick on a few countries: Iran, Saudi Arabia, pretty much all the Gulf states, Russia. These are all countries that rely heavily on oil. So even though the price may be going down, they're still producing a bunch because they need the coin. All right, that's 10 minutes on oil and why the price is declining. Get it now? So lowering demand, increasing supply. And don't fracking forget about fracking in the United States, because this is the crucial key part of it that makes it hilarious, I think, from the geopolitical standpoint. And what are those repercussions geopolitically? This is great. This is awesome. Overall, this is great for the world economy. So lower energy prices mean that more companies can more cheaply produce more stuff, and then therefore they'll be incited to produce more stuff, and more people then will buy more stuff because the stuff is cheaper. This is a long scale economic cycle we're looking at here, not specifics, but cheaper fuel means cheaper at the factory, means cheaper stuff on the shelves of the Walmart, and typically if it's cheaper, more people will buy more stuff. So this is a big injection for the global economy in general. It's fantastic. Okay, these dumping oil prices are fantastic for the world economy, more fantastic for oil importing countries, energy importing countries, countries that don't have huge amounts of fossil fuels themselves, so they have to buy it. Namely, China. China got a lot of coal. They'd rather use cheap oil, and they are. Virtually all of the European Union. Does any European Union country have any oil? Okay, yeah, there's some stuff in the North Sea, but most of those countries in continental Europe import energy, and cheaper energy means good for us, cheaper stuff. Japan, which has no fossil fuels at all, this is great news for Japan. They're trying to juice up their economy. Cheap energy makes it awesome to do that. India has some coal. India has some nuclear power. Oh no, they're working on the nuclear power. So they're big energy importers, and they need it. If you were to look at the countries that benefit directly from the cheapest oil prices in general, I just named all four of them. The United States actually is the biggest consumer of oil on a daily basis, something like 19 billion barrels. Is that right? No, 19 million. Over almost 19 million barrels is consumed by the United States daily. China is in number 2, and it's not even half that. They do about 9 million barrels daily. Japan, 4.5 million barrels daily. India, just over 3 million. Those are the 4 biggest consumers by country by day. And notice the ones I named: China, Japan, India. They all import oil. They're the biggest users, and they all import. The United States is kind of the only bizarre situation in that we actually produce tons of oil, but we also import tons of oil because we use more oil than everybody else. Right? It's starting to see the picture of why fracking in the United States is a game changer geopolitically. Okay, so this is fantastic. Low oil prices, fantastic for the United States, fantastic for oil importing countries, fantastic for the global economy in general as a whole. But let's now go back to the United States. Low oil prices are absolutely a godsend to the United States. The United States benefits more in more ways from cheap oil than any other country on planet Earth, and it's because of the geopolitical stuff. Namely, who gets hurt when oil prices get really, really low? The people that rely on it, the people that sell it, the people, the countries whose very lifeblood is that oil, and they're losing money every barrel that's sold right this second, because a year or two ago they were getting $100 for it. Now they're getting $20 less than that. Who would that be? Well, again, it's a bigger list, but let me specify why this is so awesome for the United States. Specifically, countries that rely heavily on oil and are getting damaged economically right now include Russia, Venezuela, and Iran. Which one of those three does the United States hope gets economically crippled? It's all three, baby! Tic-tac-toe! Bam! So it's the countries that rely heavily on oil that are really getting whammied right now, and the United States is in the benefits. The United States benefits from cheap oil for their economy and lots of other things, and they benefit because most of the countries they don't like are getting hurt by low oil prices. But those three are not alone. This low oil price situation really sucks for all the OPEC countries. All of them. And if you don't know what OPEC is, it's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Petroleum exporting countries. Everybody sees OPEC. A lot of students see OPEC, and they're like, OPEC, O-P-E-C. So O is for oil. No. O is for organization. And I've now said petroleum exporting countries many times because this is a collection of countries that colludes together. It's basically like a business, and they work together to fix the price of oil because they're oil exporters. The United States is actually a top 10 oil producer on planet Earth. The United States is also the #1 oil importer. So the United States could never be an OPEC. The United States doesn't export any oil. We use all the oil that we got, and we're producing more than ever before, but we still are insatiable, so we have to import it from all over the place. But let me get back to OPEC. Why did I suggest that OPEC is this group of countries that colludes together to set the oil price? And all these countries are getting hit badly by this dropping oil price. Well, first off, who are the OPEC countries? Originally, it was Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Those were the original 5 back in the day. This was formed up in the 70s, I believe, 1970s. Since then, Qatar, Libya, the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Nigeria, and Angola have all joined. Now, I don't know that you necessarily need to know every single one of those countries, but you do kind of have to know this. Saudi Arabia is the main power player of OPEC, the main big cheese, the big kahuna. They hold the biggest weight. They're the anchor of this whole foundation. If you had to choose a second place in terms of power, it would be Iran. And the Sauds and the Iranians are always clashing at OPEC meetings on exactly what the price of oil should be. Maybe I've gotten ahead of myself. How do these guys set the price of oil? Why do these 10 countries, or is it 11 or 12? Why does this dozen countries get to set the world price of oil? Because they are what we call a cartel. Yeah. A cartel is a group of businesses, or in this case countries, that own or control a majority of a commodity. Collectively. Independent, they don't control the majority, but working together, the OPEC nations control, and I'll just pick a number, let's say it's 50%. It's probably closer to 45. But let's say it's 50% of the world's oil daily is produced by these countries in this cartel. Well, since they control more than half, they can essentially set the price. And they do. And they say, hey, it's going to be $80 a barrel, or hey, it's going to be $90 a barrel. The rest of the world, there are other oil-producing countries that can use the same price, or they could charge more. But who's going to pay more for Russian oil? If the cartel OPEC says, hey, we're going to all of us together, all 12 countries, we're all agreeing that we're only going to sell our oil for $50 a barrel. If the Ruskies can say, hey, we're not an OPEC, so we're going to sell our oil for $100 a barrel. But who would buy it? Most of the market is at $50 a barrel. Does that make sense? The Ruskies can sell less. They could sell for $40 a barrel if they want. But why would they do that? The market price is $50 because OPEC has set it. So OPEC, being a majority holder of oil on planet Earth, collectively, they set the price, and they've done it for 4 decades. Collectively set world oil price. Other countries can go a little lower, a little higher, but it doesn't really matter. Everybody pretty much goes along with the OPEC price. Now let's get to how they set that price. the Saudi Arabians are friends with the United States. I'm back to the United States again with this oil story. Yeah, and it's important to note that because the Saudis have historically and currently pushed the price of oil down at OPEC meetings. And OPEC gets together, I don't know how many times a year, and they set the price for the quarter or the year. And by the way, how do they set price? Back to the old law of supply and demand. The OPEC countries get together and say, okay, well, here's what we think next year's demand is going to be, and here's how much we're currently producing. So we'll collectively decide that we're going to produce X number of barrels for next year, or maybe Y number of barrels for next year, and thus we can tweak it for what we think the demand's going to be. So we think that the world's going to need 1 million barrels of oil next year, so we're going to make 95,000 or 950,000 barrels of oil, and therefore we'll set the price at 100, and its supply should about meet demand, and everybody will have to pay the price that we're asking. Make sense? Now, being the majority shareholder, the OPEC countries could decide, let's charge $1 billion a barrel for oil. Let's screw the United States and Western Europe and Japan and charge $1 billion for oil. They would never do that. Although the Iranians and Venezuelans often push for it. And the Sauds have to say, look, no, Persians and Hugo Chavez, sit down, shut up. We're not charging $1 billion because the old law of supply and demand will kick right in. And that is, if you set the price way too high, the demand will just drop. They've done this in the past. They've had oil embargoes in the past where they've jumped the price really high. And what happens in the world, if OPEC were to wake up tomorrow and be really angry at the rest of the world and say, we're actually going to make the price of oil $500 a barrel. They could get away with it for a while, and the world would suffer and we'd fall into depression, and people would be really pissed off, and it would probably cause some wars. But over the long term, people would just stop using oil, or they certainly wouldn't use as much, and so the demand will start going down. And what happens every time, by the way, is if the price of oil goes too high, people find alternatives. Maybe alternative energies, which is what some of us are hoping humans will do, but more often than not, if the price of oil gets too high, we find alternative sources for oil. We find alternative countries outside of OPEC that have oil. Or we introduce new technologies to start producing oil in new ways from new places. We're back to the fracking! There you go. So the Saudi Arabians and all of OPEC has it in their best interest to not let the price go too high, because if it becomes too valuable, people will start using alternative energy or finding alternative sources to their oil. And that is exactly why you started having fracking technologies take hold in the United States, and it's affecting world oil prices. Let me get back to the Saudi-Iranian feud. The Iranians and the Venezuelans for years or decades have said, no, we should gouge the West as much as possible. We should charge way more because we don't care. And our economies rely heavily on the money we make from oil, so we want to get as much money as we can. And the Saudis are the ones that are saying, look, dudes, we've done this before. If it goes too high, people won't buy as much, and we'll only be screwing ourselves in the long term. So what you've had going on, and they had an OPEC meeting just a few weeks ago, some of us were debating if it was going to be the last OPEC meeting because the internal division was getting so high. The Venezuelans and the Iranians, who rely heavily on oil and are enemies of the U.S., for lack of a better word, were saying, we need to raise the price, but demand is going down, but we rely on this money, so let's just charge more money anyway. And the Sauds were like, no, we're not going to do that. And so the Iranians and the Venezuelans, and maybe others, said, okay, then we are going to cut production. Cut the supply. We'll only produce half as much next year, and therefore, law of supply and demand, there won't be as much supply out there, and then we can jack the prices back up. I believe, and by the way, they voted against cutting supply. In the meeting they had a couple weeks ago, the Saudis overrode everybody and said, no, we're not. Supply is going to remain the same as predicted, as expected for next year. We're not cutting supply. And everybody kind of went along with it after some arguing. And again, some of us were looking at this OPEC meeting a couple weeks ago saying, is this going to be the end of OPEC? Because if the price is getting this low, some of these countries are desperate. Iran's economy has been hurting for a decade. And Venezuela, quite frankly, sorry to my Venezuelan friends, Venezuela is on the brink of full collapse. And they're fully reliant on oil. So as these oil prices continue to dip, it is causing major chaos in Venezuela and more hardship on Iran that's been suffering through economic hardship. So these countries in particular, like, we're in a squeeze, and maybe we're just going to have to quit OPEC and just charge as much as we can for oil, or we're going to quit OPEC and produce way more and charge $75 a barrel as opposed to 80, so we can undercut the own club that we used to be in, because we need the profit. We need the sales. So this is the friction within the OPEC countries that's being very real. However, I will say that they just a couple days ago held another meeting. I guess it's an emergency meeting, and decided that they actually do need to cut supply for the coming year because the price is dipping way too fast. Okay, but let me get to some other impacts outside of OPEC. Russia. So oil prices plummeting is going to cause chaos in Venezuela, a situation already under strain. Increased hardship in Iran, and way more increased hardship in Russia. Russia relies heavily on the export of oil and natural gas for its economy. It's pretty much 100%, 100% big. It's largely dependent on the export of oil. So as every day passes with $80 a barrel prices, the Russian coffers are emptying quickly. Again, same in Venezuela and Iran. By the way, this is probably why Saudi Arabia can wait it out, because they're so rich, they're doing okay. They got a lot of money in the bank. They got a lot of reserves of oil. They can afford to be a little more patient than some of these countries that are really over-reliant on the oil and have already spent the money they haven't even made yet. So Russia's been getting damaged big time, and I got to give the old aha! Because I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think you need to be too untrusting to believe that the United States government is all about fracking in the United States. And even a liberal president, even an environmentalist president, even a tree-hugging president of the United States will have to be covertly, quietly supporting the fracking industry. The fracking industry has caused some concern and a lot of protest in the United States, because some people are saying this is an environmental disaster waiting to happen. But again, I think even a tree-hugging president would say, ooh, fracking may be an environmental disaster, but oh my gosh, it makes for cheaper oil, and we're totally punishing Russia, a country that we have economic sanctions against already. We hate it right now. And so we're actually in this pissing match with Russia over all these geopolitical events in Europe and the Ukraine. And what better way can you hurt Russia? No better way can you hurt Russia than undercut their economy by facilitating and encouraging lower oil prices. So the U.S. has been going gangbusters with fracking, putting more oil on the market themselves, decreasing U.S. demand for external oil, which is affecting world price, which is directly damaging the Russian economy. And there's been all sorts of talk here for a month now that the ruble, the Russian currency, has been on the brink of collapse. The economy's not in a tatters, but people are starting to have real concerns. Vladimir Putin's awesome, and he can wrestle a bear with his teeth, but he can't keep a top 10 world economy going without oil being sold. So he's a badass, but no one's quite sure how he's going to pull this one off. So this lower oil price geopolitically gives the United States and Team West in general a huge leverage chip against Russia. Huge. And against Iran. Remember, I'm not even going into detail in all these countries. I only just tangentially said Venezuela is on the brink of collapse for its own internal reasons. Iran, of course, is also in the spotlight because there's been all these negotiations for a year now about Iran's nuclear weapons program or nuclear power program or nuclear whatever program. And there have been pitched battles and sanctions against Iran, and Team West facing off against Iran and Iran's allies about the nuclear situation in Iran. And Iran's economy being hurt empowers the Team West on that front as well. So again, you're starting to see the bigger repercussions of lowering price of oil. Good for you, good for me here in the United States as we go to the pumps and get cheap gas, but way bigger implications for what's going on planet Earth. You know, I'm just thinking of ones off the top of my head. Other people that get damaged badly by these low oil prices is that Looney Tunes group called ISIS, which a lot of their money, their coffers have been filled with all the oil wells that they've taken over in Iraq and parts of Syria, actually mostly in Iraq. So it hurts them as well. So you have this bizarre, insane situation that a lot of us in a country that consumes the most oil on planet Earth, even though we produce a lot, we think it's great. This is awesome. Low oil prices is good for the United States. Think about all of the other countries that are getting whammied by it, those ones that rely heavily on oil. But again, think of the bigger geopolitical repercussions of how awesome this is for the United States. Virtually all of its top 5 enemies are getting severely whammied by this low oil price, which is again partly in response to the fracking that the United States itself is doing. So one last word on OPEC. You could possibly see them still not raise the price of oil too much. Again, maybe the group's going to fall apart. Venezuela may have to jump soon because Venezuela needs money. And part of being in the cartel is you say, no, we all agree to the rules. We're all agreeing we're only going to produce so much so that we know we can set the price and everybody has to sell at the same price. Otherwise, the whole system falls apart. You may see some of these poor countries have to jump. But they're going to probably continue to keep the price of oil low for maybe a couple of intriguing reasons. One, they're keeping the price of oil low from the Saudi standpoint because the Saudis are friends with the United States. And the Saudis are buying hell tons of weapons from the United States. And the Saudis, although it's not written down on paper, would rely heavily on the United States for military support if anything goes bad in the arena, in the region, which is like every day. So the Sauds have a personal reason, personal alliance and strategic reasons to keep the price of oil low, even though it damages them a little bit, but damages their neighbors more. But the Sauds are not impractical. They rely on oil money too. So they could be looking at this more long term and saying, hey, everybody, keep the price of oil low. In fact, let it go a little bit lower. Because think it out. What happens if the price of oil gets even lower and lower and lower? Because the Sauds have lived through this once before. All of OPEC has, but I keep picking on the Sauds because they're the kind of natural leader of OPEC. And what I'm alluding to here is that the price of oil goes to $70 a barrel, $60 a barrel. Hell, let's stop there. If it goes to $60 a barrel, that now it gets to a point of being so cheap, it makes fracking impractical. It makes looking for alternative sources, it makes it not worth the investment. So this is how companies work. It's like, wow, for $100 a barrel, we'll go figure out new technologies and go to North Dakota and get a bunch of oil. Even though it's hard and it's expensive, but you know, if we're going to get $100 a barrel, it's totally worth it. We can still make a profit. You start to knock the price of oil down to $60 a barrel, you're not turning a profit in North Dakota anymore. Those tar sands of Canada aren't going to turn a profit anymore because they require a ton of processing. So the more you got to spend to get the oil, the more you got to make. And if the price keeps dropping down, the break point will come and everybody will say, oh, the frack with fracking, we're not doing that anymore. And no, I'm not going to invest $1 billion looking for oil in the Arctic Sea. It's not worth it. It's not selling for enough. And I believe that's what the Sauds and maybe some of the other OPEC countries are counting on. It's like, no, let's see if we can put them out of business. And again, we have personal interest to let the United States, our ally, help keep the price of oil low. So does that make sense? How is that for a world tour of the the implications of low oil prices? They affect everyone, everywhere. And I know I've already probably said it 5 or 6 times, but I'll do a summary since this is a long podcast. Hurting Venezuela a lot. Hurting Iran a little bit less. Hurting Russia big time. And again, it's getting to the point that outsiders are looking at Russia going, Russia's starting to not look like a really good investment for the future because all they do is produce oil. They can still pay their bills for a while and they'll still sell oil on the cheap to China and some other places, but as you decrease economic power, you kind of decrease political power. Unless Putin wants to go full-on invasion, go nutso and take over planet Earth, but I don't see that happening. So those 3 countries specifically getting damaged, all oil-producing nations, including all those other OPEC countries, losing money, and the United States and all the other oil-importing countries are making off like bandits now. But none none have the geopolitical benefits that the United States is gaining right now from cheap oil prices. So it's good for you and your wallet, and it's good for Uncle Sam and his political clout as well. How about that? Party on.